Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Business Innovators Radio. This is your host, Constant Taylor. Today, we have a very special guest on the show, and they're going to share some very exciting information with us. So, if you're looking to increase your personal and professional effectiveness in the areas of ethics, then you've come to the right place. Our special guest today is Frank Bucaro. Frank has been speaking professionally for over 30 years, and the content that Frank primarily speaks on is business ethics and value-based leadership development. Frank has spoken both nationally and internationally and is based out of the Chicago area. He has a book coming out soon called If Good Ethics is Good Business, Then What's the Problem? Frank, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm really happy to be here.
And we're glad to have you. I'd like to kick off the show by asking you if you could tell the listeners a little bit about your speaking business and how you help organizations become more effective in the areas of ethics.
Sure. My approach is working with C-suite executives and VPs of compliance in providing the ethics part of their compliance training and the ethics and values part of their leadership development. And that goes all the way down to mid-level management. So my focus solely is on ethics and values to partner with the compliance department, VP of compliance, who have their plates loaded with doing compliance training. I partner with them to provide the ethics part of the compliance training.
Okay, interesting. So in terms of dealing with issues how do you actually engage with the clients initially? Do you in terms of new business when you're contacting someone for the first time?
Sure. Usually what happens is I work with them to understand the distinction, the difference between compliance and ethics. They are not the same.
Okay.
Compliance is letter of the law, and ethics is spirit of the law. And you cannot be an expert in both. So I try to tell them, when you have an ethics and compliance officer, that's telling your people is this person is an expert in both, but you can't. A compliance officer, their expertise is compliance, the law, very valuable, very necessary, etc. But when there's an ethics issue, who do they go to? These people, by and large, are not trained in ethics. So I focus on the process of thinking ethically within a corporation.
So what does your ideal corporation or company look like where you can look at this company and say, this is the perfect opportunity for me to add value to this organization? Well,
usually, to be honest, unethical companies don't hire me. It's the ones that are trying to do the right thing to kind of push it up a notch. What's the next level? Can you help us look at our code of ethics? Can you help us with our new leadership program? Can you give us some ideas for ongoing ethics training? So in essence, I'm always speaking to the choir, so to speak, but I'm the go-to guy for ethics because that's all that I do. And so I give them my experience of being in a lot of different industries over the 30 years, experience of talking to a lot of different audiences to customize the approach that I take with ethics in a specific company or industry.
Okay. So then the mafia wouldn't be interested in utilizing it.
Well, being from Chicago, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes you wonder.
Yeah. They're trying to clean up their act. So
yeah, really.
So what are 2 to 3 problems, either real or perceived, that you're able to solve for your clients?
First of all, the distinction between compliance and ethics. Okay. And here's the analogy that I use. They're both, let's say, fruit. One's an apple, one's an orange. They're both good for you, but they're distinctly different and should be treated distinctly different. Number 2, I find that the budget for ethics training is almost non-existent or an add-on and not as important as compliance training. which I think it should be at least equally as important.
Mm-hmm.
There are two key ethical issues in today's corporate world that I focus on. Number one, we have now 5 generations in the workplace at the same time. For the first time in American history, we have the boomers, the X's, the Y's, the millennials, and now what I read, this generation is called the digital natives, those born in 1990, who are now in the workplace. So now you have 5 different definitions of ethics. Now what are you going to do? That's the issue number one. Issue number 2 is that it is no longer a key issue of what's right versus wrong in businesses today, because that's pretty obvious. The real issue you need to deal with is what happens when it's right versus right. What happens when 2 of your corporate values are in conflict with each other, or your personal values? Now how do you process that answer? And so those are the 2 things that I really, really focus on in helping companies become more effective and develop their ethical culture.
That is really a fascinating and I'm sure a real dilemma. How do you help take them through the process where you've got 2 values that are both ethical and in compliance, but are out of alignment?
Well, the key thing is they have to have certain ethical processes, like how to make a good decision from an ethical standpoint. What things do I need to consider? You can't make an ethical decision on the spur of the moment. So I have to look at circumstances. What do I know? What don't I know? Mm-hmm. And I ought to take time to find out what I don't know in order to make the decision a better one. Mm-hmm. You need to look at, am I focusing on the greater good or the common good when I make a decision? You have to be aware of whom you will benefit, whom you will burden, and how that decision was made. And so these are the skills and the insights that I bring to the table. And taking them through a process to have an aha moment, I never thought of it that way before. Because ethics is only proactive. You choose this. Mm-hmm. Compliance is reactive. Mm-hmm. There's a law and I got to obey it, so it's a reactive approach.
Right.
So it's an entirely different approach to looking at decision making.
So, for example, with personally, if I have 2 things that are conflicting and they're both in compliance and they're ethical, then I look at my value system and say, okay, what do I value? Do you help organizations in that area, or is that something that comes up looking at what their corporate values are?
Yeah, and there's a great example of an author called Rushworth Kidder, and he came up with 4 dilemmas. Every decision is around 4 dilemmas, and here's what they are. Truth versus loyalty, short-term versus long-term, individual versus community, and justice versus mercy. All of them are great values. Mm-hmm. But what happens when you're confronted with truth versus loyalty? How do you make that decision? How do you do that? Whom do you burden? What's going to be your price to pay, if you even know it at that time? Mm-hmm. And how we process that. Those are the key issues, because it makes people think. You sit back and say, oh, that's not as an easy decision as I thought. But when I make it this way, who will I burden? Whom will I benefit? And then how will I justify the decision that was made? And then you got to go for it.
Okay. What are 1 or 2 popular misconceptions about the service that you provide and the results that you produce?
I think one of the big misperceptions is that for a number of companies, our compliance will take care of everything. Yeah, maybe ethics, but it's not really an important equal partner to the compliance training. That's kind of number 1. Okay. Except, for those companies that bring me in, because they're already there. They're already moving towards the ethics, the ongoing training program, et cetera. They just need a little bump, new ideas, some, further concepts, et cetera. So that misconception. And the other misconception that I mentioned earlier is when you confuse ethics and compliance as being one and the same. You can be compliant and unethical as blazes. But you can't really be, unethical and, if you're truly values-based and have a problem with the law.
Mm-hmm.
So to be ethical, you're more engaged in obeying the law than being unethical and trying to find a way to get around it.
Okay. And you really answered my next question, which is what would be the main reason that customers would not engage with you? So I'll do a follow-up to that is how do you overcome the objections where companies are a little bit hesitant because they are more focused on compliance versus the other?
Yep. Well, the first thing I tell them is, first of all, this is not an expense. This is an investment.
Mm.
And so when you invest in this type of training, you decrease the odds of something happening from a legal standpoint. We're only looking at odds here, because there is no ROI on ethics training. I mean, how do you grade it? How do you evaluate it? You look at how people act on the basis of their values. They look to their leaders because people listen with their eyes, not with their ears.
Mm-hmm.
So if they see their leaders modeling the behavior, then that will catch and they will do the same thing based on the values. So it's increasing the odds of something happening that could cause a legal issue. And as I tell my clients, what would an ethical violation cost your company? And they would say, well, it could be millions. I said, then why are we talking about my fee?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
which is a much cheaper investment than going to court.
Right.
So I'm going to help you decrease the odds of something seriously happen with what I bring to the table.
If you look
and
at,
I'll partner with you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say with Volkswagen, you look at the situation that they're in where it's costing them billions of dollars for stepping outside of the ethical lines.
And we don't see any end to this. It was a GM with the switches in the cars where people died, and they knew about it for 10 years. How is it, for example, that the Wall Street execs that caused the recession still have their jobs? The reason why they have their jobs? Because they had legal documents that protected them. So what they did was legal. Is it ethical? I don't think so.
Right.
But they're still there. Rick Pitino's going to have some interesting challenges at the University of Louisville. With that whole debacle, with somebody that he hired, with his, basketball stars or, whatever, with favors and all kinds of things. I mean, so where does this end? Where does the buck stop? And it has to go down through the entire organization, not just C-suite, but down to the mid-level managers and down to the guy you hire this morning to work for your company.
Yeah. And it's interesting because most of these executives, if they, I had a boss, if he found $1,000 on the floor, he would turn it into the police, no questions asked. But we were producing a product that was known to cause cancer. And I asked him about it. This was just when I was getting out of school. I asked him, I said, doesn't this stuff that we're eating right now, doesn't this cause cancer? And he looked me dead in the eye and said, this stuff is paying for your salary.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other issue that I deal with is the whole whistleblower issue. I think that is the most demeaning term to call a human being because you have trained these people in your corporate values. They have embodied them. It's integral to their thinking. And when something goes wrong and they report it, and you don't respond to that, and they have to go outside, then you punish them. We should be calling these people values advocates, not whistleblowers, and you should be rewarding them for finding what was wrong in that drug or, that process or whatever. So it's kind of a skewed view of what's right or wrong according to whom, and if money dictates, then ethics really takes a hit.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's very valuable information that you're sharing. Now, with the last 60 seconds, could you convey to the listeners one theme central message so that if they don't get anything else out of this interview, this is what I would like to leave them with.
I would like to leave them with, please consider investing in ongoing ethics training in a multiple functional view. Could be online, in person, but not one can do it all, because it's an investment in your people. It's an investment in your business, because everybody likes to work with people they trust, and that's based on values, and that is what makes a company ethical, creates an ethical culture, and stems the flow of anything trying to happen, of your people trying to do something that would be illegal or unethical. But it has to be an ongoing kind of context by which the values over and over again we embody.
Well said. If the listeners would like to contact your organization, learn more about the services that you provide, what is the best way for them to do that?
They can email me, frank@frankbucaro.com, or call my office at 630-483-2276.
Excellent. Frank, thank you so much for coming on the show. That was very informative information that you shared with our listeners, and we appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me to share this.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.